Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Quincy 400 Adams Presidential Speaker Series. It's been a robust year with a lot of Quincy 400 activities, and we're nearing the end of the season. So here we are tonight for another great Adams Speaker Series. Certainly want to welcome you all. If you'd please stand and join me in the presentation of the colors.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you to our North Quincy High School, ROTC. Thank you. Can always count on them on public events. We appreciate it. Thank you, Ethan. I did notice one of my colleagues, City Council at Large Scott Campbell, here with me. Any other electeds? Well, I'm not getting in the way. We have a real treat tonight. This panel about national security is one of I think, of great interest today as we speak. The world's changed dramatically. We have a number of challenges at the local level as well as state level and national level in that security area. So we're really thrilled to have three outstanding folks with us here tonight. I've just met Mr. Hirtle for the first time. Jonathan, welcome. Congressman Lynch, who we work with on a regular basis for all things Quincy. And of course, General Joe Dunford, who served his nation for more than 4 decades, retiring as the 19th chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Commandant of the Marine Corps. And now, glutton for punishment, he's serving as the chairman of the Adams Presidential Center, and we're grateful for that. So welcome to our speakers. Leading the panel tonight, we have Kurt Graham. We poached Kurt from the Truman Library some time ago. I congratulate the board on a great selection. Kurt is now the executive director, president of the Adams Presidential Center. So Kurt, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that very much. And like you, I look forward to this panel discussion. You know, it's a great opportunity on John Adams' 290th birthday to stop and think about leadership. And certainly we have 3 distinguished leaders in their own right in each of their respective spheres tonight to visit with us, but want to call you out as well, Mayor Koch, for all you've done for our community, not just for all things Adams, but for all things Quincy. Appreciate your leadership as well. It's been an incredible opportunity to work with you and to see how much this community means to you. And so I thank you very much for that. Before calling the panel up and beginning, I just wanted to do a couple of thank yous and a couple of housekeeping items. One, we have several of our board members from the Adams Presidential Center here, and we're so pleased and proud to be partnering with Quincy 400 on this event on Adams' birthday. It just makes a lot of sense for everybody, I think. But we have Catherine Craven, Ed Cohane, Rob Waldron, and I don't know if there are any other board members here. Raise a hand if you are. But, and of course, General Dunford is our board chairman, so we appreciate the support of our board for this important program. And of course, our staff is here in Mass as well. Kathy O'Brien put this thing together in her usual form, and yes, that's very helpful. Pooja Shevan and Sadie Troy and Kathy Folan are also here. Working in the perimeter and making sure everything goes well, so we appreciate them. I wanted to thank again the Quincy and Quincy North ROTC for presenting the colors. I think that's wonderful. These are high school students, and they will also be on hand tonight participating in the Q&A. So if you have a question, we're going to distribute cards, and please write your question out, and they'll hand those to me throughout the evening, and we'll work your questions in. But and those ROTC young men and women will be a part of that effort, gathering those up for you. So without further ado, let me invite our panel to come and take the stage. Introduce them each briefly in turn as we get started here. Go ahead, John, right here would be great. Yeah. There we go. I could take all of our allotted time just going over the resumes of these three gentlemen and how distinguished they are in their fields, but I'm going to make this very brief because I think we have more important things to discuss than all that has been accomplished. But probably newest to all of you is Mr. Jon Hirtle, who is the founder and leader of Hirtle Callahan, a distinguished business leader. They manage a lot of endowment dollars for nonprofits and others, and they have a staggering amount of money under management. And so obviously I think his perspective as a business leader will be very important to us here tonight. Obviously Congressman Lynch represents the 8th District, I believe it is here, and represents Quincy in that as well. So local congressman, we very much appreciate his taking the time to be here. Has had a very distinguished career and some service in the Congress very relevant to tonight's topic. So we appreciate him being here. Of course, General Joe Dunford, a Quincy native as well. It's already been mentioned, Commandant of the Marine Corps, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Amazing military guy, amazing leader, and we appreciate having him here with us tonight to go over this. So gentlemen, it seems like John Adams' 290th birthday is kind of a good moment to stop and take stock of where we are as a nation. We have a lot to be proud of, a lot to be thankful for, maybe some things to be concerned about. But I think it's a great opportunity to stop and think about that. So as we think about national security, when we put this panel together, it was very purposeful. We have a distinguished military leader, a distinguished political leader, and a distinguished business leader. And we want to kind of look at aspects of national security from all three of those perspectives, because they're all obviously intertwined. There's obviously a lot to be said about all of it. But if we are going to be secure and continue in our role as a leading nation, all three of those areas need to be represented. General, let me start with you and just talk a little bit about, I'd like to hear from all of you about the challenges that you think that we face today. I mean, when you think about your role in the past, and I know you're still active in a lot of these areas, there are a lot of significant challenges facing our country. What are the things that keep you up at night when you think about from a national security perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. And before we start, I do want to thank Mr. Hirtle and Congressman Lynch for joining us here tonight. And we're 1 year after Kurt, a year ago, Kurt moderated his first panel here for the Adams Presidential Center. So we're gaining momentum, Kurt, and thanks for all you've done over the past year. And of course, realizing the mayor's vision for the Adams Presidential Center as well. When I think about the current challenges, one of the things I used to always say when I was still in active duty was that Henry Kissinger said we live in the most complex, volatile period since World War II. He said that in 2014, and it wouldn't take much of an argument to convince people that it's far more complicated in 2025 than it was in 2014. And maybe just to get our discussion going, I'd probably highlight a couple of areas that we ought to be concerned about. One is the alignment of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And although you'll read the newspaper sometimes and people will say these are not real alliances, they're transactional relationships, it's not the same as U.S. allies, what I would tell you is that the technology transfer, the intelligence sharing, the information sharing, the material support, the political support, the economic support amongst those four countries and others that are associated with them is real, and we should be concerned about that. They clearly have a vision for a world that's much different than one that would be consistent with our national interests. The second issue is one that we haven't talked about for decades, but it's the increased relevance of nuclear weapons. Some of you have seen in the last 24 hours president's announcement for testing nuclear weapons. But I don't bring the issue up this evening because of that statement. I bring it up because Vladimir Putin, certainly in the Ukraine conflict, raised that issue certainly early on a number of times. But the reason I bring it up is because today, unlike during the Cold War, we really don't have any arms control and non-proliferation regimes to speak of. And the last vestige of arms control is the strategic arm reduction talks, START 2, and the Russians have said they would extend that for another year. But the Chinese, who are in the process of tripling their nuclear enterprise, refuse to even engage in conversations about nuclear weapons right now until they're a peer of the United States. The third area that I would raise, broadly speaking, is the pace of change, and I talked a little bit about geopolitical change, but the other area of change is technological change, with significant implications for our national security. Every day, you certainly read in the newspaper about artificial intelligence, but it's artificial intelligence, it's developing cyberspace, it's developments in space, and really right around the corner is developments in quantum as well. So this idea of technology and the pace of change for technology is one we ought to be concerned about. And I'll put that in some perspective. There's always changes, but the pace of change, to tell you how different it is. When I was a second lieutenant in 1977, Mr. Hirtle was a second lieutenant in 1975. I feel like a World War II lieutenant could have fallen in on one of our exercises and been completely comfortable in one of our exercises. Why? Because weapons, communication systems, vehicles, and so forth hadn't really profoundly changed in terms of capability in over 30, at that point, that was 37 or 35, 32 years after World War II. And so my point is that in the past, the pace of change has been measured across decades, and now in many cases, it's in months. And there's probably two other issues to round out the things that bring up. And again, I specifically didn't talk about crises in Ukraine and Gaza and other places. I know we'll get into that later, speaking more broadly. But the United States, for most of my career, had a competitive advantage over any potential adversary. And what did that mean? That meant we could project power around the world relatively uncontested, and then do what needed to be done to advance our national interests when we got there. And that is no longer the case. We are challenged to do that. Over the last 2 decades, Russia, China, and to some extent others have developed a whole range of capabilities designed specifically to keep the United States from projecting power around the world and then advancing our national interests when we get there. And so this idea of our competitive advantage having eroded is one I would mention. And related to that, but important enough to call out separately, is our defense industrial base, which we have seen much has been written about that over the last few months. But our defense industrial base is not able to keep pace with the demands of the United States and our allies. So I'd probably lay out those 5 just to begin our conversation as things we ought to pay attention to when we talk about our national security.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a lot. There's a lot to unpack there.
I'd just like to point out that our food hadn't changed either. We had sea rations that still had cigarette packs in them. They were in a can. For 20 years, they've been in a can.
No, John, I mean, when I say that, we can go on at length, but we were still using howitzers for artillery, and the word precision was not associated with those weapon systems. And so in terms of time and space and so many other factors, warfare hadn't changed in decades. And I would tell you today, a second lieutenant that would report to a formation in the Army, or the Marine Corps, Air Force, or ensign in the Navy today, it would be remarkably different than it was just 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the pace of change, it is interesting to think about that. I mean, technology, we all acknowledge, is changing a lot of things. But so, Congressman, let me ask you, when you think about the differences, the things that are changing in the world of national security, I mean, domestically, a lot is going on as well. And there's been a very rapid change in that sphere as well. So what is the relationship? I mean, you're someone who has a vast experience. You've served, I believe, on the Foreign Affairs Committee. What is it that domestic policies and politics, the domestic scene, what is the relationship between that and national security?
Well, what worries me, and I just want to follow up on one point that the General made, and that is the advent of new technologies. For the first time in the history of the world, you have a country like China with over 1 billion people who can actually conduct full spectrum surveillance over every single one of their citizens. That's never been possible before for any dictator, for any regime, and they can do that now. So that's deeply troubling because it sets up a model perhaps for Russia, for Iran, and for others who might want to go in that direction. The second thing that troubles me is with the current administration, this has been a point of departure. So you talk about U.S. history, and then you can talk about what's going on right now, and it's a real point of departure where the current president, and I won't get political, but the current president has taken a very dim adversarial view of NATO, the United Nations, institutions that were part of our fabric and our foreign policy from President Wilson after World War I and FDR and Truman after World War II, and it was really a part of who we are and our interrelationship with the rest of the world. We're focused on those two institutions and others, but now this administration has taken a deliberately hostile attitude towards those institutions and has appointed the vast number of ambassadors that have been appointed in diplomatic roles around the world on our behalf have zero experience in diplomacy. So that's worrying. The third thing that I think that would keep me up at night and does at times is that the current administration has changed the relationship between the U.S. military and the civilian population. So through the Posse Comitatus Act and others, there's always been, and I know the gentleman on my right and left knew that it would not be good to have a politicized military. And yet right now, that's what we're beginning to have. And my fear when you see illegal, and I've been part of the lawsuits, illegal use of the military, principally the National Guard, but the use of the military against the civilian population in places like Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Chicago, and others. And you see the military following those illegal commands from the commander-in-chief. My fear is that he is grooming the officer corps to follow orders that are not in line with this Constitution. And that's a deep fear that I have, especially when the president has made pronouncements that are focused on perhaps a military oversight of the upcoming elections. And that would be a complete and utter attack on democracy and the Constitution. So that's what worries me.
No, that's very interesting. There's a lot to unpack there. You mentioned Truman. I have to share with you a story for any of your colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. And this is free. You don't have to pay extra for this. But Truman had a group of third graders one day come to the auditorium in the Truman Library, and he had them all out there, and he would usually come out and meet the kids and talk to them about things. And he said, "Do you know why the House has a Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate has a Foreign Relations Committee?" All these little 10-year-olds are like, "Wow, what could be it?" Well, senators are too old to have affairs. So you can share that with your with your friends on the committee.
I'll write that down.
I don't know if that helps or not, but
I'm glad we didn't pay for that, Kurt.
yeah. Well, it was free from Truman. I just passed it on in the spirit it was given. So, Mr. Hirtle, talk to us a little bit about the economic implications of what's going on. We're hearing militarily and domestically some concerns about the role of the military, but the relationship between what goes on in the economy, and you're someone who has probably pays a little more attention to the markets than most people in this room. So tell us what keeps you up at night. What are you concerned about?
I'm concerned about, first of all, I was talking to Kurt earlier, and I think, everybody my age thinks the world's falling apart, right? So my brother said to me, yeah, our grandparents thought Elvis was going to ruin America, and our parents thought the Beatles were going to ruin America, and now I have you,
Yeah.
so, and so maybe it's just my age, but I actually think it's different this time, and I think it's been I was talking to my mentor from Wall Street when President Biden was running against President Trump, and I said, how the heck did this happen? We get 330 plus million Americans, and this is the choice we have? He said, I think it was Vietnam. And I said, okay, I'm not going to try to unpack that, but that was 50 years ago. So what I believe is, related to investing, compound interest. If you change something 1 or 2% a year for 50 years, it's a big difference. So I think for 50 years, we've had a loss. We've had this trend of, and it's a multidimensional trend, and it's led us to a place where we have less confidence in our leaders, we have less civic association, we have less awareness of what it means to be a citizen in a republic, and all of that going on at the same time when we have unprecedented change. Globalization, which nobody really says anything about lately, but that's huge. That was sort of a 10-year-ago discussion. It's still going on. It's the size of the Industrial Revolution. That's the implication of something like globalization. AI is another thing that is about like the Industrial Revolution. So you think about that trend of citizenship as a country going like this, not like this, but like this, and then all this stress on top of it. Interesting. The market keeps going up. So what is that about? The market is an interesting indicator because it's like if you were going to bet on the Patriots-Eagles game, the first thing one would do would be check the Las Vegas spread. The Las Vegas spread is the market. So you want that data point. As an investor, you have to be able to go against the market to beat it. But in general, you want to know what the market thinks. After 9/11, the CIA was talking about developing a market for terrorist insurance. And people were big hue and cry because people were going to make money on terrorism. That wasn't the point. The point was to try and get the information from that market to anticipate where the next terrorist strike might be to help make that, and it never happened. But the point is markets have information in them. So the market keeps going straight up, so there must be some reason to be optimistic. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to corporate earnings. And so there's two things going on here. There's a lot of societal change. And I think that, so there's a lot of societal change that's a lot of stress that we just talked about. At the same time, a lot of these technologies are transforming the world and continuing to make it a better place to live. Pharmaceuticals, they think about what happened during COVID and when they were able to come up with that mRNA vaccine so fast. I mean, there are so many transformational advantages that are waiting in the wings, and that's reflected in earnings, which is driving the stock market up. That doesn't mean we should all be sitting back and being happy, because that other trend is very real. And so I guess I'd close by saying one thing. When you're in a time of turmoil, what I believe is that you fall back on first principles. So I did a little bit of mountain climbing at once in my life, and if you're on the top of a mountain and you get into a lightning storm, you don't discuss what to do. You already know what to do, which is that you coil up your ropes, get rid of your metal, and get low. In the Marine Corps, if you took a hill, the first thing you did was dig in, because you knew you were vulnerable to counterattack. You didn't discuss it. It was a first principle. So when we're in a place like this, I think we've got to fall back on first principles, which is citizenship, character. President Adams said that, a democracy, paraphrasing, wouldn't survive without a moral framework. It would fall into chaos. Sounds a little familiar right now. So what is our moral code? And I'm not asking us to go back to traditional mainstream religions. That's good. We have a lot of people are still there, and that's a good thing. But we've got to have a framework for citizenship that allows us to avoid the chaos. And while all this change is going on, and I'm an optimist, so a lot of this is good change, but the trends, and I look out here, Joe and I were talking about grandchildren. Kurt and I have a friend from Wyoming who likes to say, don't you feel bad for people who have average grandchildren? And so Joe and I do not have average grandchildren, but I think about the world I want to leave my grandchildren 50 years from now. And I remember 50 years ago, it doesn't seem long ago, when we had the centennial. I was a freshly minted lieutenant in the Marine Corps. It doesn't seem that long ago. My oldest granddaughter's 12. 50 years from now, she'll be 62. What world do I want her to be living in? And is there a way for us to find a sweet spot between the chaos, which creates energy and creativity and so forth, and a moral framework that allows us to really move to higher ground so that we're not doing this anymore. We're kind of doing this. If we can just shift for 2 degrees, we'll be like 50 years from now, it'll be a much better place. So I think that's the thing that we need to do to complement the optimism of the financial markets. The financial markets are heartless. After World War II, financial markets, business people were eager to rush into the Soviet Union and make money. There was no moral judgment. That's not what financial markets do not do moral judgments. So they're optimistic about the future. I'd like to be a little more optimistic based on where we have come from as a nation and where President Adams saw us going. So that's kind of where I am. I remain optimistic about the economy and about the global economy. And our model of free enterprise is unmatched. And people worry about China. And they can do things from time to time because they have centrally planned decision-making, which is efficient. But if you give me a free market versus centrally planned economy, I'll bet on the free market every minute of every day. And so we are going to be fine economically. But these other factors, how we interact in the world, in a world that is increasingly frightening, where change is happening faster, in my view, requires that we fall back on the fundamentals and make sure that remember who we are and we stick to our values.
I appreciate that notion of the economic principles, just changing the interest rate just a little bit and just getting a little more compound interest in terms of our citizenship. That's very insightful. I appreciate that. I was thinking about, as I was listening to all of you talk about some of the challenges we face, particularly when it comes to the U.S. role in the world. Perceptions of that are changing a lot about what is our proper role, what has our role been, why should it be what it is. And what's interesting to me is that role seems to be changing without a lot of debate, without a lot of, I don't hear a lot of discussion about it. Now, Congressman, you are part of the greatest debating club in the world, and so tell us, do you think that this question of America's role in the world, is that a front burner issue among your colleagues, or is that something that's just sort of happening without a whole lot of self-conscious thought?
Well, a great question. In terms of us debating the U.S. role in the world, I think we do that every day, but we do it contextually, as General Dunford pointed out, on the issue of Gaza. It takes up huge amounts of time within Congress. Right now, the House, the Senate, and the presidency is in Republicans' hands, so there's less opportunity for debate when they have the numbers, and we would do the same if we were in the majority in terms of getting our issues out there. I would say that within the context of those debates, I think we realize from Iraq and Afghanistan that you cannot export democracy through the Defense Department. That's not going to work. So, as I said before, many of our diplomats around the world right now have very little experience in diplomacy. So I think that's a negative for us. And I think that there is a retrenchment in some ways that the president has led by his attitudes toward the UN and his attitudes towards NATO, and his economic policy as well, the use of tariffs, in some cases which are completely reasonable, but in others I'm more skeptical. Is it right to treat China better than you're treating Canada right now? Given the interplay between our countries. So I think the tariffs have sort of put some energy behind that policy within the White House, and I think there always was a sort of an America First ideal within the Republican Party and among some blue states as well, that perhaps we were being too generous with our payments to the UN and to NATO and supporting European defense initiatives, things like that. And so some people within Congress and in the general public feel that President Trump is properly pulling us back away from what they saw or see as an overextension of U.S. Involvement around the world. But for me personally, the world is becoming a much smaller place by the day. And as others have noted here tonight, the pace, the velocity of change. I'm the top Democrat on the subcommittee on artificial intelligence. And to see what is coming, I sat with the chief engineer of Anthropic a couple of weeks ago. And I asked him, and he had come before us 5 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. And I had his notes and his projections of where they would be today. He said, it's unbelievable, but we're 7 years ahead of where we thought we would be only 3 years ago. Just the enormous technological change and what they can do now with artificial intelligence has far exceeded even their wildest dreams. That's not all good, and there's a great book out there by, I think it's David Susskind. He's a Brit. It's called How to Think About AI. How to Think About AI. And I thought, after reading the book, it's very common parlance. It's not too technical. It talks about the core issues around artificial intelligence and what that could mean to us and what our role should be in terms of the development of artificial intelligence. So I would recommend that to anybody who wants to begin to understand the implications that the advancement of artificial intelligence presents to us as a country, but to the world.
Is that it, General? You think about, there are economic changes that are complex. There's this phenomenal, tsunami of AI technology that is coming. We wonder, why is this not being debated? Why are we not thinking about America's role in the world? Is it just shifting in so many ways and so fast that we can't keep up, or what's going on there?
Let me, if you remove the politics from it, maybe frame the debate that we should be having. So after World War II, based on our experiences in World War I and World War II, the United States led the establishment of institutions and development of relationships to try to mitigate the consequences of a World War II or World War I occurring again. And we bore the mantle of global leadership, and without question, that came with a price. It came with an economic price to the American people, and we certainly had to exert a lot of political capital to try to grow these institutions and literally lead the world. And some people are questioning today whether continuing to carry that burden is something the American people ought to do. The only thing that I would say, and this is what we should debate, is that the result of us being willing to bear that burden of leadership after World War II resulted in us for 8 decades being the most economically prosperous, the most politically influential, and the most secure country in the world. There is no question that adjustments need to be made in the 21st century based on the issues we talked about earlier, just the pace of geopolitical and technological change. But what makes me think of this is when a congressman talks about artificial intelligence, who do we want to imagine the world tomorrow? Do we want it to be a world that the United States leads the development of, or do we want it to be China's influence in tomorrow? Do we want to set the standards for artificial intelligence? Do we want to impact the standards for trade? Do we want to impact the standards for human rights? Or do we want to concede that to somebody else? And there's very few candidates that would step up in the absence of the United States. So there's no question that some releveling of the burden of alliances like NATO and our alliances in the Pacific and so forth, getting a fair balance in those relationships is absolutely critical. But before we put our hand on the plunger and we blow up the post-World War II order, and you could argue in many ways that with the effectiveness of the UN and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization now, maybe that's already the case. You know, it's better to have a vision of where we're going, you know, the as-is world, before we just decide to take apart the to-be world, I should say, and before we decide to take apart the as-is world. And in my view, we can help encourage allies to carry a greater share of the burden. There's no doubt about that. But an alignment of like-minded nations who have similar values and similar national interests, will never be exactly the same, but consistent national interests, working together in what I would describe as a coherent collective way is the best way to secure our national interests. And I'll finish, because this is a debate I think all of us ought to have. The United States, every president since World War II, if you consider this stage as the world, every president since World War II has accepted responsibility for two things: the rules within which all activity was taking place on this stage, and then the second part of it is the specific transactions that affected the United States. But we viewed that the time and effort that we were expending on things that maybe weren't directly related to our national interests, but informed the environment within which we pursued our national interests, was worth expending, again, the economic resource and the political capital to do that. And what I'm afraid now is, and this trend goes back decades, so I'm not making a political statement, there's a trend that goes back decades where we're more focused on specific transactions as they affect the United States, and we're not viewing the long-term environment within which those transactions will take place tomorrow. And we think the cost to the United States of actually taking responsibility and taking leadership for the stage itself is something that we no longer want to carry, because it's not fair. But again, the outcome clearly in a post-World War II era was absolutely inextricably linked to the success that we've had over the last 80 years. And despite all the challenges the United States has, I defy anybody to look at another country that is more economically prosperous, more politically influential, and more secure than the United States of America. Right. So course and speed corrections, absolutely. But blow up the current arrangement that we have right now, I'm not on board with that unless somebody can clearly articulate where we're going.
Very well said. You know, the congressman had mentioned the desire in both parties, both colleagues on both sides, saying we need to pull back some of what we're doing. You know, and as you say, we need some course corrections. But as I was listening to you, General, I was thinking about the military feeding into our economic success in turn helping us to purchase the stability that we need. And so some of these things that seem like giveaways or seem like a waste of money, it's interesting to think about. Maybe that is the vehicle of diplomacy. Maybe that's something that makes a difference to us in terms of how we can kind of lead the world in those ways.
Well, the congressman mentioned NATO a few minutes ago, and you know, many people have forgotten or never knew that the only time, you know, you hear Article 5, which is a collective response of NATO when something happens, the only time Article 5 was ever invoked was after 9/11. And so on
behalf of the United States.
On behalf of the United States, and when Congressman Lynch used to come and visit me in Afghanistan, we had 49 countries represented in some way in Afghanistan. And we can debate Afghanistan, but separate from that was the response of our allies and partners to what was perceived as an attack on the United States. And so I would argue there's an example of the decades of investment that we made in those relationships. And when we needed those relationships, they were there.
Mm-hmm. Amen. No, I absolutely agree. You know, there's going to have to be a moment, I think, for Congress and the country to decide on our direction of leadership. And I think that you know, it's opportune that we're here with the Adams Foundation and talking about these same issues that he grappled with, I think, at a very early time. But nevertheless, the decisions that he made during his time and the country adopted during his time shape, you know, the world that we live in today.
Absolutely. No, that's a great segue, because obviously I wanted to ask you all the role that the United States had on the world stage in Adams' time was obviously very, very different than where we are today. It was not a foregone conclusion that this young, nascent republic would somehow rise to be an economic superpower, greatest political influence in the world, the greatest military might in the world. That could not have been foreseen. And in fact, they were even concerned about some of that. I mean, Adams and a lot of the founders were concerned about a concentration of military power, about too much power in one place. And let me just ask you quickly, General, about that. Why were they afraid of a concentration of military power?
Yeah, I mean, the founding fathers, George Washington and John Adams, both really had concerns about a large standing army, and that was informed by the experience in Europe where the army was turned on the people. Mm-hmm. And this is why we saw George Washington at the end of the war turn in his commission. This is why we saw George Washington subordinate himself to the Continental Congress, even when it was very difficult to subordinate himself from that, even when they were unable to support the plans that he thought were necessary to be successful on the battlefield. And what I would say, so the congressman earlier talked about concerns he has about the employment of the National Guard and so forth. And I won't litigate that now, but I think it is important for the American people to understand, why is the U.S. military nonpartisan? Why do we emphasize that the U.S. military is under civilian control? As I mentioned, the founding fathers were concerned that the Army could be turned on itself. There are a few countries with the experience that we have now with 250 years. There's not been a hint of a coup or military action against the government or against the people. Mm-hmm. It hadn't happened, and it's unusual in human history. But particularly in post-World War II, the American people have accepted in effect, large standing army representative of all the services. We have not been below 1 million men and women in uniform since 1945. And you say, well, why are the American people not concerned about this large standing army? And the reason is, number one, this nonpartisan ethic. And what that results in is trust. Mm-hmm. The American people trust the U.S. military not to turn on it. And the second is the absolute of civilian control. My concern about this is that in 2018, when I was still on active duty, 80% of the American people had high confidence or somewhat high confidence in the U.S. military. That number is down to about 60, 61%. Amongst Republicans, 92% had high confidence in the U.S. military. And in the Gallup poll last summer, so we'll see where we are this summer, in the Gallup poll last summer, that number was down to 60%, which is the overall average. And so you can take comfort in the fact that the U.S. military has 60% of the American people have confidence, which is significantly more than any other institution. But if you think about the implications of the U.S. military not having the full trust and confidence of the American people, this is a great concern. And so when we employ the U.S. military, when we think about the relationship, when we involve them in political activities, when we get behind them to advance our political causes, we should be aware of the implications of that, because it erodes this idea of trust. And we have a gift, I believe, in the United States of America. We have a gift in the U.S. military in that there's not a concern that it would turn on us, that it would always be responsive to elected officials and Secretary of Defense, President of the United States, and the Congress in accordance with Article 1. And that's something that I think we have taken for granted for a long time, and is a debate. Sure. You speak about debates we should have. I think people need to understand why the Founding Fathers had that concern, why we aren't concerned about that or haven't been concerned about that over the last few decades, and make sure that if that idea of civilian control and nonpartisanship is what mitigates the concerns and the risks associated with a large standing army, that those two things become crown jewels that we protect. Mm-hmm.
Very good. John, you had a comment?
I was just going to expand on that. So, in the United military, you swear allegiance to the Constitution. You don't swear to the person in charge, and that's key. And I remember when I was on active duty, a guy was a little senior to me, had been on active duty when President Nixon resigned, and he was in training with a bunch of foreign military officers, and they asked him if he was worried about a coup, and he literally laughed at them. That's how deep it is that we would never think about something like, because we work for the Constitution. So the rule of law is key, because that's, when you look at a country, and Adams struggled with these things, when you break away from the king and parliament, what is the absolute authority? Who's the last voice on the decision? And the answer is the law. In our country, it's the Constitution that we are beholden to. So that's one thought I have. On a lighter subject, I want to go back to my grandmother being worried about Elvis. And basically, I noticed that 50 years, just before President Adams passed away in 1826, and he and Jefferson had started corresponding again, they were despondent about the country. They were so worried and sure that it was going down in the wrong direction. So we've been through a lot. I remember when the great financial crisis was going on, I was in Chicago meeting with a senior person, and she said to me the world had never been more frightening. And she was my age. I said, how about that total thermonuclear annihilation thing that we were facing and hiding under our desks when we were kids in school? That was a pretty good one. And then people say, well, the country's never been so divided. I said, well, we did have a civil war at one point, and we got through all of that. So I think it is a fast-paced world. I think there are things like Newtonian physics that you have to fall back on. And it's true with investing. It's true with think of yourself as citizenship. And so that's what I think. I also think, going back, we were talking more about our changing role in the world. After World War II, we were the only remaining industrialized nation. Everything else was destroyed. England was destroyed. They had rationing for 5 or 10 years after the war was over. So we were producing, automobiles, steel, and appliances, and selling them all around the world at any price we named it, because we were the only ones doing it. And so what did that do? It created this sense of that baby boom era and that golden era. I often wonder to myself, was that normal, or was that an unusual era? And we want to go back to those days when steel workers, I grew up in Pittsburgh, were shoveling coal into a furnace. They had a hunting camp, a house, and a boat on the river from shoveling coal into a furnace. Well, when globalization happened, that didn't work anymore, because somebody in some other country would be willing to shovel coal into a furnace a lot cheaper and with fewer benefits than the guy in Pittsburgh. So that changed the world. And it made the world, in many ways, it made the world better, but not for that steel worker in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to go through a whole nother round of that with AI. And it's going to hit not just blue-collar workers, guys shoveling coal, but everybody is going to be impacted by AI. So it's an uncertain future. John Maynard Keynes said there are two types of forecasters, those who don't know and those who don't know they don't know. And so I'm definitely in the I don't know thing, but I know that if I can fall back on my fundamentals, I think we're going to be okay. And that's my emphasis on all this noise. The noise isn't going to go away, and you can't deal with it item by item by item by item. You have to have a theme. And so that my last point I would like to say is I am convinced America is not just a country, it's an idea. And the idea that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That statement is earth-shattering. And the American Revolution, this is not my quote, is the most significant event in human history since the birth of Jesus Christ. If that doesn't make us exceptional, that doesn't mean better, but exceptional, and positioned for world leadership, what possibly could? And so we're not supposed to be the policemen of the world. After World War II, and all of a sudden we put money into Germany, we invested in Japan, we created our competition. Europe, all this time, has not had to worry about defense. We defended them. So I got to tell you, I try to be pragmatic. I try to get away from, do I like the president, don't I like the president? I want to try to get what's happening here. The idea that in a way, what we're doing with Europe, to use a vernacular analogy, is we're kind of kicking the teenagers out of the house. Like, you guys it's been a long time since World War II. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet on defense. And by the way, if you are spending money on defense, you have fewer dollars to spend on social programs, like healthcare. And so your companies don't have to compete. They don't have to pay their employees healthcare like ours do. So that's an unfair advantage that you have. So if we're going to compete on an even playing field as peers, it's time to step up. So that's a little bit what's going on. Now, I don't like the way we do it, and I would like us, but the three of us are pretty traditional, and there's a difference between managers and disruptors. And the current administration is a disruptor. There's a lot of collateral damage when they go through things. But when I look at the net effect, I think maybe we're going to end up at a better place. So this isn't, the tariffs, as a free markets guy, tariffs are just bad. I mean, they're a bad idea. They were disproved as a good idea economically years ago. But he's using them as a negotiating ploy. So, it's going to be interesting to see where we are 4 years from now. And by the way, in about another year, he's going to be a lame duck. So all of this stuff is going to work its way out. And 4 years is a drop in the bucket in the scope of human history. But America, as an exceptional concept, is not a drop in the bucket in human history. And we have a moral obligation to remember who we are and not to be preaching to the rest of the world, but to just set an example for the world. How is this supposed to work in a civil society that's a republic, where we have competing interests? I'm nostalgic about the conversations that Ronald Reagan used to have with Tip O'Neill. I love that. Like, here's a guy, one guy believes in less government, one guy believes in more government. They're fighting it out, and sometimes it gets pretty heated. But it's kind of like having an argument with your sister at Thanksgiving dinner. In the end, you're still family members, you're still Americans. And so we can work this out, and we find that sweet spot. So there's a lot going on in the world today. Every one of these things leads to another point. I mean, if you look at a normal distribution of people in America politically, the middle 2/3 still believe what you all believe and what we believe, that America is an exceptional place, that we have a bright future, that we believe we want to have a better world for our children. But we're listening to the tails all the time. So the tails of the normal distribution, the extreme left and the extreme right, they've captured the media because it's clickbait, and the rest of us in the middle don't have a voice. So Ken Burns, in his he's got a new documentary out about the revolution, and he's very excited about it. He agrees with the statement that it's the most significant event in human history since the birth of Jesus Christ. But he says we've lost the conversation. Well, what's the conversation? It's the Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan discussion. That's the conversation. And we got to get back to that because we have to respect each other as Americans. So America is more than a country, it's a concept.
Congressman, if that is true, and I'm thinking about the ambiguity of America's role. I mean, how do we address challenges around the world, given that we're not even in agreement about the things that all of you have said? I mean, that there's a lot of disagreement about what our role should be. So, in light of that ambiguity, how do we address the challenges that face us?
Well,
one at a time. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, one at a time is a good starting point. Remember, the president's policy cannot just be his own, to the exclusion of all other ideas, to the exclusion of any meaningful debate and discussion between members of Congress in a representative government. I want the interests and the concerns of my constituents to be present in that discussion as we formulate that policy. Now, the president is the president and has certain privileges under our Constitution, but not to the negation of the other branches of government. And I think that's the failure. If there is a failure of this administration, that's where it begins.
Interesting.
Kurt, let me,
just
from a nonpartisan perspective, address that. You say, well, why does it have to be about more than the current administration's policy? If you think about the Cold War, why were we successful? We had continuity in policy across decades and across administrations, Democrat and Republican. And so while there were differences between Democrat and Republican administrations, we had a consensus on what were the national security challenges that needed to be addressed, and we had some continuity and consistency in addressing those challenges. And when I think about the challenges we opened up with today, dealing with the alignment of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, dealing with technological change, dealing with the increased importance of nuclear weapons, these issues are issues that are going to require continuity in policy and focus across decades. These are not problems that can be solved in 2 or 3 years. And so, while we should accept that there's going to be a difference amongst political parties in some areas, what I think we need to think about is, what is the thread of continuity to our approach to these foreign policy challenges that needs to exist in order for us to be successful. Because as a young Marine, I learned an expression: order, counter-order, disorder. And we can't afford that on the world stage. We've got to have some continuity. So that's why what the Congressman said, I think, is so true. And it's not a political comment about a particular administration. It's about our nation needing to address really significant challenges with some degree of continuity for a period of time. And just one quick comment about, you asked about the military, but it really is about institutions more broadly. And it made me, when Jon was talking, it made me think of this one experience that I had. So our founding fathers gave us this nonpartisan military and civilian control of the military. I mean, really, you can trace that back directly to George Washington, very established. They obviously gave us the Constitution, that gave us the structures and so forth. And when we talk about institutions sometimes, and institutions being under attack, actually, it doesn't get people excited. People roll their eyes, and they don't even know what we're talking about. But I had an experience in 2018 that reminded me of why these institutions are so important. I went to graduate school with a Saudi member of the royal family. And immediately, and I hadn't heard from him in 20 years, and immediately after, some of you may remember, about 350 Saudis were locked up in a hotel without any due process. Sure. Immediately after that, this individual reached out and said, hey, I'd like to come and have lunch on Friday. This is like on Wednesday. And he literally got in a plane and flew to the United States, and I had lunch with him. And he said, hey, Joe, I'm very worried about my country. I came to get some advice and to share perspective. And he said, I know that you're worried about your country too, but you know what the difference between my country and your country is? And I said, no, I don't know what it is. He said, you have institutions to protect you. Which to me, when we think about these institutions that we sometimes take for granted, these institutions are what allow us to realize the vision of the Founding Fathers, that each of us as individuals is actually equal.
Yeah, those are great experiences when you think there's nothing like someone who doesn't have what you take for granted to sort of bring that to the fore. That's great.
I want to add something to that, because when I was on active duty, for one time I had 30 days off, and I could either take golf lessons or sailing lessons. I was in South Carolina, and I didn't really have any interest in golf, so I took sailing lessons. So I learned on a widgeon, which is like a little boat that maybe 2 people could get in, and I learned that you had to have your hand on the tiller, and you were trying to find a sweet spot so that you could be right on the wind. And if you think about, I'm trying to go fast, I want to be right on the wind. I don't want to be way left. I don't want to be way right. There's a sweet spot. And so much of what you do in life is trying to find that sweet spot. And the sweet spot between having the institutions that provide continuity so that we and everybody else in the world has some idea of what they can count on. I mean, they've got to, you just can't be unreliable. At the same time, we can't be dragged down by dysfunctional institutions. And that can happen too. You get too much bureaucracy, too much baggage. So there's a sweet spot. And that's what we hope our leaders are trying to find. They've got that hand on the tiller. Today we're going all the way over to the right, all the way over to the left, all the way to the right. So that's disconcerting. Nobody knows where we're going. But if we have that sweet spot, then we can, find the best path forward, making incremental changes along the way.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, someone from the audience put an interesting twist on this discussion, talking about social media. We've talked about technology, Facebook. They're even alluding to foreign actors, and saying, how can the average citizen even be able to trust the information that they're getting? So even if they want to engage in the debate, how do they know that the basic inputs that they're getting for the conversation are reliable?
Well, read, first of all, have a I mean, I'm in a lucky position where I've got, 18 people who read all the newspapers and then send me back what they think is important for me to know. And it's, it's drinking from a fire hose every morning. But you can educate yourself on issues, especially if you've got a, compartmentalized, area of study that you're interested in. But I think you've got to diversify your news source, and there needs to be laser focus on the factual, because online, the social media is a source of falsity and cruelty in many respects, whether you're reading the comments or what some blogger is putting out there. So you have to be very, very careful. Also, to be quite honest with you, our adversaries know that is our weakness. They know that democracy and nobody exercises the right to free speech more in this country than the Russians. They are constantly, they've got institutions set up to pump falsity and negativity towards the government on a regular basis into this country. They're the best at it. They are the best at it, the Russians. So, I know we did a couple of studies after the 2020 election and the 2024 elections on how many times U.S. citizens were, bombarded with negative or false comments about the institutions of our government or about Hillary Clinton versus Mr. Trump at the time. And it's a full-bore propaganda mission on the part of the Russians to make sure that we attack each other and that we are divided. And that's not by accident, it's purposeful. And there's a lot of conspiracy ideas out there that take root. It's incredible how successful the propagandists have become in the country. On issues that have been, factually established, and that somehow are undermined by the constant feeding into your news feed of these aberrant and false ideas that are generated by people who want us to fail. So you got to be careful, you got to be thoughtful, you've got to be diverse in terms of what you're taking in, and especially what you're acting upon.
General question from the audience for you. Shifting gears here, but this is an interesting question. How badly burned are our bridges between the U.S. and its allies?
Yeah, honestly speaking, there's some friction in these relationships, but I believe down deep, the things that bring us together are still there. I would even argue, if you take a look at the relationship between the United States and Japan, Australia, South Korea, because of the rise of China, arguably, certainly, and I'm now talking specifically from a security perspective, are as good as they've been in my career. So if you go through the noise of the political space and you get down to what's actually happening, as an example, the United States has typically had a bilateral relationship with South Korea and a bilateral relationship with Japan. And we couldn't ever get it to be a trilateral relationship because of the historical scar tissue that existed between Japan and South Korea. And now there's a very effective trilateral relationship between South Korea, Japan, and the United States. There's a relationship between Australia, Japan, the United States, the United Kingdom. So I think those relationships are there. And then with regard to NATO, I think I'm a little bit where John is, in the sense that some of that disruption was necessary in the NATO relationship. And I spent 4 years on the NATO Military Committee in my last job, and it was very difficult to get NATO nations to spend what needed to be spent. And more importantly, it wasn't just about spending money, it was develop the capabilities necessary to deter Russia. And for 2 years, we debated whether or not Russia was a threat between 2015 and 2017. So what I would say is, we have some political friction in our alliances right now. The fundamentals are still solid. We shouldn't be complacent. We shouldn't take it for granted. But I think that what binds us together is stronger right now than what would drive us apart, because we do have common threats. We do have adversaries that are going to require this idea of collective coherent action. And I think my own judgment is, from the relationships I've developed over the years, that both in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe, from a security perspective, the relationships are still pretty solid.
When you think about those relationships, it's interesting because Washington and others in the founding warned about what they called entangling alliances, about being too close to other nations. And obviously the United States has become what it has through the nurturing and developing of these alliances. We have someone in the audience has asked, pointed out that alliances have been a big part of our policy, security policy since the revolution. What do you see as the outcome of a security policy with those weakened or even eliminated alliances, Congressman?
Yeah, well, I do want to amplify what General Dunford has said about the feelings of the people in the countries versus, the temporary leadership, whether it's Israel or Brussels or France or Great Britain. I had the honor of, we had the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge recently, and I had an opportunity, because of the committee I sit on, to walk in behind the 82nd Airborne. Today's 82nd Airborne and the 82nd Airborne surviving members who had been at Bastogne. And it was a big deal for Europe. And I would say, on average, it was 20 deep on the sidewalk walking through Bastogne. And every single person there had an American flag. It just warmed my heart to know that the sacrifice of our fathers and grandfathers is still deeply appreciated. But there was a spirit there because of what's going on in Ukraine. And the fact that at that moment, then President Biden was providing arms and assistance to the Ukrainians, and also we didn't have as many as General Dunford had in Afghanistan, but we had a coalition that was, the military to military cooperation and friendship and solidarity and co-support was very evident in that. So I think though everything is salvageable, so much of that is on relationships, and the spirit of the relationship starts at the top. So, we've had some presidents throughout our history that devalued the international relationships with our allies. And we've had others that were incredibly invested. I have to say that, Senator Rubio, Secretary Rubio, is a shining example of what you can do in a administration that doesn't have a very pro-diplomacy approach, but he has carved out his role there in a very meaningful way and has maintained respect as a diplomat with so many countries across the world. Unfortunately, he has 3 jobs now. He's also heading up the National Archives, and he runs USAID as well. So, no good deed goes unpunished. But I think the framework is still there. It can all be renewed. You just got to put the right people into the right places, and we can rebuild and we can strengthen those relationships.
Jon, several of our audience members have submitted questions that allude to not just a fear of our entanglement or our potential conflict or war with a foreign power, but domestic violence, domestic unrest. Are we prepared for something like that? How do we anticipate that kind of a threat?
Sure,
Kent
hope not.
State
I mean,
type.
so the 20th century historian Arnold Toynbee said that countries don't die by murder, they die by suicide, and so we are our own threat. Nobody's going to bring us down except ourselves. So I hope not. Civil unrest is, you think about civil rights movement was largely peaceful except for the government's interaction with the protesters. So we've got a pretty good history that we haven't followed lately of civil disobedience. But we've got violence from time to time too. So, I don't know the answer, and I hope not. And I certainly was discouraged by the assault on the Capitol building and things like that. So it's not a good sign. I want to go back. I'm sorry to do this to you, but I want to go back to the AI question, because you got to ask the other guys that one. That's more them than it is me. But I was with a senior AI guy recently, and he said to me that he had been interviewed, and they asked him, what inning are we in? And he said the first batter hasn't even stepped up to the plate yet. So it is so early.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think that we will be, I believe, AI will allow us to figure out where the facts are. In other words, it is so powerful and so effective. All of us today, as a congressman said, you got to read 3 papers, and then you have to compare the 3 and say, what makes sense to me? And then there's these things online, I don't know if you've seen them, like Swopes.com and UrbanLegend.com, that you can check stories and see if they're truthful. It's a lot of work. Why doesn't AI do that for me? And they will. So there's going to be, we're early days. It's in transition. Nobody knows where it's going. And so when you're in that early phase, it's very hard to project how things are going to work. Global Alliance, I was just in London because the Reagan Foundation was rededicating Ronald Reagan's statue in Grosvenor Square because they had done construction in Grosvenor Square, and so they had to take it down. And they were doing it on the 100th birthday of Margaret Thatcher's birth. So it was a combined thing, and it was a Reagan-Thatcher, US-UK special relationship deal. And it was kind of cool, but I was struck by Churchill's, one of his many great quotes was that America generally does the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility, right? So we're like in the middle of exhausting possibilities right now, but we're heading in the right direction, and these democracies know how messy it is. I mean, they had Boris Johnson as a prime minister, and France, one of their prime ministers is going to jail right now. So it happens in a democracy, and it's messy, but there's no other better form, and so I'm optimistic about that. But I am also worried about this lifting up of the extreme and gutting out of the middle. Our voice is no longer there, that voice of reason. We talked earlier, there was a book written 20 years ago called Bowling Alone, and how when de Tocqueville toured America, one of the things he talked about was voluntary association. People used to go to church more, they used to go to temples more, they used to belong to the Knights of Columbus, to the Kiwanis Club, to the Rotary, and all those associations tended to level their attitude. So if I'm going to church and my daughter's in the choir with somebody I disagree with politically, I kind of get mellowed, because even though I disagree with them, our daughters are friends, that association. That's been replaced by the internet and by social media, which is scary because you just get reinforced. So the internet and social media and this phone is an opiate. It's an opiate. So we have a lot of opiates in our lives, and we have learned through time how to control them. So you can have a glass of wine at dinner. That doesn't mean you can drink all day, every day. So we're going to have, that's another thing that's in transition, we're going to have to learn how to handle that opiate and get back to associating with each other as citizens and as citizen leaders. If you're in a bowling league, somebody's in charge. That's leadership. Somebody has to organize it. Somebody has to mitigate arguments. That's leadership. If you do that at every level through society as Americans, one of the things that I have a friend who is very involved in Special Olympics, and they say that in Europe, when they try to raise money for Special Olympics, they say, what do you mean? That's the government's job. In America, we solve problems ourselves. Why? Because when the first pilgrims stepped off the boat, they were in the frontier. There was no government. So as they moved across the country, if the bridge gets washed out, there's no government to call. You have to get your friends together and fix the bridge. So we have this association in our past, coming together as citizens to do things. We got to get back to that. So I talked to a guy who wrote a book called The Bill of Obligations about this, and he said, well, you're talking about cultural change. I'm not in that business. I'm not Mao Zedong. I said, it's not cultural change, it's cultural reawakening. This is nothing new. This is what we did. This is the good stuff. This is that Newtonian physics. We know how to build bridges forward. The materials might change, the stress factors might change, the length of the span might change, but we know how to build bridges. We know what the physics are, and we need to fall back on those. And that's going to provide for the economy as well. The economy, when we talk about foreign relations, foreign entanglements, I am a George Washington maniac. I love this guy, you know, more ever through my whole life. I'm on the board of the Museum of the American Revolution, and he's right in the middle of all that. So I really love him. But he was, you know, he was not all-knowing. I hate to say that, but, you know, the foreign entanglements thing, all prosperity, if you look through history, has come through trade. That's really where the money is trade. So you can't do trade without foreign entanglements. And so when we look at protecting the sea lane so we can do commerce, so we can afford to pay for our schools, and everything in this country that we love, we have to have commerce to do that. So we just have to have constructive commercial relationships. So.
When John just gave a great advertisement for the Adams Presidential Center. Why the Adams Presidential Center? Civic engagement and civil discourse. Thank you, John.
He's been a great commercial all night. Really appreciate it. I wanted to get back to this question of, because I think John gave us an interesting answer about maybe AI and some of these other technologies will actually be the thing that maybe gets us together a little more. When you think about domestic violence, domestic division, and there's several questions from the audience here, and I won't read them all, but just to summarize, because there are several people who are very concerned about what we might call class or economic disparity, the difference between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, there's that rift. And that, of course, is divisive, right? There are resentments that build. I mean, there are all kinds of, we have a whole panel about just that kind of discussion. But what do you think of that in terms of how do we overcome those kinds of differences in order to be able to not have domestic violence and have these sort of military displays in our own streets?
Well, I believe, you know, the Constitution had an answer for that, and that is the police power delegated to the states, and, you know, the military, you know, subservient and directed at the will of the executive. And if we need more safety on our streets, then state governments and city governments have to provide, town governments have to provide that safety. That's how we've always done this. You know, I understand the mayor of Memphis said, you know, that's great, come on in. We didn't have enough money for all our police force. I mean, governing is about making decisions, but that was a hard and fast rule that we did not allow the military to be deployed against the civilian population. I mean, these young men and women, God bless them, they took an oath to serve this country. When they put on that uniform, they put that uniform on for all of us. And how dare we denigrate or devalue their willingness to serve our country by sending them with weapons of war into a civilian population to confront civilians who might be protesting. I get that. That's also in the Bill of Rights, the right to petition your government, the right to free speech. But, you know, it just burned me to think of the wonderful gift that was, that these young people stepped up and said, I will serve. Mm-hmm. They put on that uniform. They become all our sons and daughters. And then to have them put up against a civilian population, and in the case of Washington, D.C., after a while, things were so quiet down there that they had them picking up trash and landscaping and doing sod, and, you know, I thought that was an insult to the wonderful and patriotic decision that they made to serve their country. And so I think the answer is, you know, our two guiding documents are the Declaration of Independence which also talked about, they were very angry in the litany of offenses of the king, forcing them to harbor the military in their homes, specifically, in this area, in Boston, in Quincy. And that was their reason for breaking off that relationship with England, was because of what they were doing with the military against the civilian population. So I haven't seen any city yet that really needed military presence there to bring it to order. It might have needed more police or something like that, but I think there's a way to address that problem. Find the sweet spot, find that solution without tearing a hole in the Constitution.
And pledging.
The question, though, Kurt, about the haves and have-nots is a really hard one, because it goes back to globalization. If you benefit from globalization, if you can somehow take advantage of that, it makes a lot of money for you and your organization. If you are exploited by it, it's bad. And so we're going through that. Now, I would say one ray of hope, and this is a little bit out there, but I don't know if any of you follow Arthur Brooks from Harvard, but he talks about authentic happiness. He's written a lot about authentic happiness and what it means, meaningful work, so forth. Historically, when you think about happiness, we've always associated that with material well-being. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the number one thing is you got to have safety. So if somebody's chasing you with a knife, you got to get away from them. Second thing is food and shelter. Third is social esteem. And then the fourth is self-actualization. What does our society esteem? And we don't necessarily, I saw Jerry Seinfeld talking recently about, he said, what happened? He goes, when I was a kid, if you had a good job and you had a good family and you had a nice house and you had whatever you were doing, comedian, bricklayer, whatever, they thought you were great. Now it's how can you make more money? How can you make more money? How can you make more money? We're already so affluent as a country, not everybody, but most people, we don't have to worry about food and shelter anymore. So we're really into social esteem. So maybe we're going to get to a place, it's almost going back to the Jeffersonian notion of villages, where people are authentically happy doing whatever they can do. And I know that I've run into a few very unhappy multi-billionaires, so that just having the money doesn't make you happy. So the idea is authentic happiness. And how do we get there? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of authentic happiness. Maybe this is a new phase for us as a society, because we've already crushed the economic stuff. That doesn't mean they're not going to be haves and have-nots, because in this AI thing, all the guys this is going to change the world. So Bill Gates changed the world with Microsoft. Apple changed the world. Those guys made a lot of money because every one of us is benefiting from what they did for us. That's the way the system works. So I don't know. It's hard, though. When you think about the disparity between what a CEO makes and what the line people work at that company, it's never been broader. It's massively different. And that doesn't feel right to me. But it's a hard one.
We're ending we're getting down to just the final few minutes here, and I want to give you gentlemen the last word, but I just want to say, when you think about the world that Adams helped to create, and part of our message at the APC is not just that he was there, but that he made all the difference in the world. There wouldn't have been a Washington, there wouldn't have been a Jefferson, but for John Adams. And I think that this system that was put in place, and we have to remember, they debated every line of it. It wasn't this rosy moment of everybody having consensus. There was rigorous debate. Adams apparently was the one who could take the floor and really get everybody's attention. The others did a lot of other great things, obviously. Washington's the great general, Jefferson, the great writer, all of those things, but they weren't great public speakers necessarily. It was Adams who could kind of bring people into his orb. And so when you think about this incredible legacy, and it is an ongoing, we sometimes refer to it as an experiment. I'm not sure I like that, because I don't know if that's really what it is. But I think we have so much to think about, to be grateful for, from what that generation did for us, and you've all sort of referenced that. I just want to give you a chance, we'll start with you, Congressman, to have the last word on what it is that we're doing today that makes you feel good about the system that was created and what we can do to shore that up.
Well, it goes beyond President John Adams, and of course includes his wife Abigail and his son John Quincy and his wife, Louisa Catherine, who are all buried down the street. I just think that when you think about the Adams family, and then, you know, Charles Francis Adams and others, and all the contributions they have made, and I thank my friend Tom Koch for bringing that all to life here in the city of Quincy, and really projecting that as a city and as a community. But when you think about John Adams and everything that he did, and the fundamental facts and gifts that he presented, not only to the Massachusetts Constitution, but to our federal Constitution. You think about what Abigail did for women before there was a women's movement. You know, she was there, remember the ladies, and her example, I think, provided so much gain for women in future generations. John Quincy, with his outspoken advocacy on behalf of slaves at the time, and he was one of the earliest. I don't think he even called himself an abolitionist, but he was the first of the abolitionists, defended the crew of the Amistad successfully. And you think about that how his life just reverberated throughout our history, you know, into the Civil War and beyond, those positions that he took when they weren't popular and they weren't common, and what he offered. And Louisa Catherine Adams, I had an opportunity to read the recent book on John Quincy Adams, and the heroism of that woman was just unspeakable. I mean, to put her kids and one servant in an open carriage and drive in the Russian winter from Moscow to Paris through Napoleon's lines. I mean, what was she thinking?
Pretty gutsy.
I mean, just the sheer heroism. So you think about the gift of the Adams family to our country and throughout our history. And I throw this in the face of some of my Republican colleagues on a regular basis. You know, we're the home of the true Tea Party. You know, we threw the King's Teslas into the harbor. You know, but you know, those were our neighbors. This is our history. I just relish in that. And like I say, because of your good work, and Kurt, and also the Adams Foundation, and also my friend Mayor Koch, we've regenerated so much interest and excitement around this, and I think it's a wonderful way to accomplish what we talked about before, that civic engagement of today's population by making them aware of our collective history, and try to get them to buy into what we're all about here, and make them understand those principles. If it's not going to be religion, as others have noted, it may not be that, but it can be the things that we stand for, our ideals that can carry us and bring us closer together. So again, I'm just thankful for the opportunity. I'm thankful for the work of the Adams Foundation, and we've got a meeting next week where I think we're finally at the 2-yard line on trying to get a plot of land adjacent to the White House where the John and Abigail Adams, the Adams family library will be located. So it's all good.
So
exciting.
So, John, are you prepared to carry the message back to Philadelphia that Quincy is in fact the epicenter of the revolution, and that this is the most important work in this era is happening right here? I just would like to have you comment on that.
This is why we sat John.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
I'm sandwiched. So if you come to Philadelphia, please come join us, see us at the Museum of the American Revolution, which is right next to the Constitution Center and 100 yards from Independence Hall, and we would love to all have you there. It's an 8-year-old museum. It's brand new. I'm very proud of it. We have a great, I'm sure we're going to do things together. So,
for sure.
So that'll be terrific.
We look forward to that. General, you've done as much as any living American to keep us safe and to stand up for and to represent the values which you've brought to the Adams Center, not just the values that you served in uniform, but when you were serving in uniform, but the values of the Adams, and you've brought them back. to really inform what the Adams Presidential Center is all about. So we're going to give you the last word tonight.
Yeah, the thing I would say, just reflecting on all the discussion we've had tonight, it would be easy to focus on all the challenges that our country faces, and we have to some extent tonight. But I talked about, in the post-World War II era, our economic prosperity, our security, our political influence, and that hasn't changed. And we still, because of the gift that our founding fathers gave us, we are still without hyperbole, we're still the greatest country in the world. And I think what the 250th gives us an opportunity to do a little bit is just to reflect on our individual responsibilities and what we need to do to take care of that gift. It's easy to become complacent, and I think to some extent we're in a period of complacency about the gift that we got from our founding fathers, and what we can do is energize a bit people to realize their responsibilities and roles as citizens and actually realize the full vision of the founding fathers. But we ought to leave more optimistic than pessimistic. Absolutely. And despite the fact that you'll occasionally hear, a public figure say, "I'm leaving the United States and I'm giving up my citizenship," there are still far more people trying to get in than get out.
Absolutely.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah. Well, it's a great time to be in the Adams business. There's no question about that. And we love all that this represents, and we appreciate. Please join me in thanking Mr. Hirtle, Congressman Lynch, General Dunford.